Meeting the guys.
Jason made a new friend. His name is Daniel. Daniel only has one arm. He lost it in a car accident as a child. Jason really enjoyed Daniel's company. He invited Daniel out with some other friends. Jason was sure that the other guys would like Daniel too. "Meet us at the restaurant," said Jason. Daniel walked into the restaurant. All the other guys stared at him. Daniel got very nervous. "I hope they don't make fun of my arm," he thought. He really wanted to become friends with Jason's buddies. "Wow," said one of the guys. "That's a really nice shirt." Daniel was relieved. He was invited along every week after that.
Sweaters from Grandma.
Stephen loved almost everything about his grandma. There was only one thing he hated. She always knitted sweaters for him. Stephen understood that she did it to be nice. However, all the sweaters were very ugly. Stephen visited her once a week. She had a new sweater for him each time. Stephen lived in a small apartment. There was no room for him to keep all the sweaters. He had to give all of them away. Grandma will never find out, he thought. One day, Stephen's grandma visited him by surprise. She asked to see his sweaters. "Someone stole all of them," he said. "They were too nice." She made him 10 more by the next month.
Big hair.
Dorothy had very curly hair. She hated it. "It's too big," she always complained. Dorothy wanted to be an actress. All actresses she knew had straight hair. It always looked perfect and smooth. Every morning, Dorothy was up at 5 a.m. She spent 2 hours straightening her hair. One morning, Dorothy had a big acting audition. She was running very late. There was no time to straighten her hair. "I'm never going to get the job with this hair," she thought. She was wrong. As soon as the director saw Dorothy, she was hired. "Your hair stands out so much," he said. "You must love it." "Of course I do," replied Dorothy.
The ugly sister.
Lisa grew up in a huge family. She had 6 older sisters. All of them were very beautiful. This made Lisa feel very bad. She knew she looked nothing like them. Lisa had even heard people say she was the ugly sister. As teens, the girls spent every weekend out on dates. Lisa always stayed home alone. Her sisters spent their days combing their hair and putting on makeup. Lisa spent her days reading and studying. Her sisters laughed at her a lot. As adults, all her sisters got married young. They all had handsome husbands with no brains or jobs. Lisa went to college. She became a rich scientist and traveled the world. She was the one laughing now.
I know how to snowboard.
Kevin asked Michelle on a date. He wanted to go snowboarding. "I love snowboarding," said Michelle. This was a lie. She had never been snowboarding. She wanted to impress Kevin. "That's great," said Kevin. "Then we can go to the advanced slope." Michelle was terrified. The top of the advanced slope was extremely high. It was too late to say the truth. "This can't be that hard," she thought. I just have to keep my balance. Michelle flew off the hill. She stayed standing for less than 2 seconds. She looked like a giant snowball by the time she reached the bottom of the slope. Kevin felt bad for her. He hugged her tight to get her warm. Her plan worked out after all.
Skyscraper.
He was on the highest floor of a tall building. The building was a skyscraper. He was with his dad. His dad worked on the building. He met his dad's co-workers. They were all kind. He asked his dad a question. "Is it not scary working so high up?" Dad answered no. He said it was not noticeable. His son noticed. He kept thinking about it. They were so high in the sky. He imagined the building falling down. He was scared of heights. His dad told him not to think about it. He could not stop thinking about it. It was time to go home. They went down the elevator. It was a long ride. He did not want to come back. It was too frightening for him.
Jane from LA.
Her name was Jane. She lived in Los Angeles. She was born there. She loved Los Angeles. She went to work in downtown Los Angeles. There are many people in Los Angeles. She drove to work every day. She looked out her window. There were people walking down the street. Some were white, some were black, and others were brown. This did not matter. They were all natives of Los Angeles. She went out with friends. They went to restaurants and shows. Los Angeles had many restaurants. Her favorite were Indian restaurants. Los Angeles has many performers. She saw famous artists and bands. It was fun going out in Los Angeles. She often came back home late. She was always safe. She never spoke to strangers. She avoided walking on streets that were not safe. Jane did want to live in Los Angeles. It was her home.
Parade.
It was fun going to the parade. He went to the parade every year. He never missed going. The parade was tomorrow. He was going with his girlfriend. His girlfriend's name was Mary. This year, he planned on bringing his little sister. His little sister had not gone to a parade. It was her first time going. She was excited. It was the day before the parade. They made their plan. They had to wake up early. They had to bring snacks and water. They also had to wear comfortable shoes. The parade lasted all day. The day of the parade came. Everything went according to plan. The parade was amazing. They saw marching bands. They saw parade floats. Some of them were big. The parade ended in the afternoon. They were tired, but they were happy. They went back home. "Can we come back again?" his little sister asked. He smiled at her. She knew the answer already.
Road trip.
John and his friends were going on a road trip. They were driving from Los Angeles to Washington. John had everything planned out. He had prepared CDs with their favorite songs. They would sing along to them the whole way. He even packed his trunk full of their favorite snacks. John picked up his friends early in the morning. He showed them a map. It was full of dots. These are all the stops we should make, he said. John wanted to see the Golden Gate Bridge, the Grand Canyon, Old Faithful, and many other monuments. What song should we hear first? Asked John. All his friends were already asleep. They stayed this way the whole trip.
A trip to Six Flags.
George's best friend was visiting him. Joseph lived in Arizona. George moved to Los Angeles 2 years ago. He hadn't seen Joseph since then. George wanted his friend to have fun. He wanted to convince him to move to Los Angeles with him. George had a great idea. He would take his friend to Six Flags. They didn't have big roller coasters in Arizona. George and Joseph got on a ride called Tatsu. It was huge and had more than 5 loops. Joseph screamed more than any other people. "Isn't that great?" asked George. "If you move here, we'll be coming here all the time." Joseph never returned to Los Angeles again.
Protesting SeaWorld.
SeaWorld is one of the most famous parks in the world. Thousands of people visit each year. Most of them go to see the dolphins and whales perform tricks. This is something they could never see in the wild. SeaWorld has been under a lot of pressure lately. Thousands of people have been protesting the parks. These people say that dolphins and whales should not be forced to live in such small places. They should also never be forced to perform pointless tricks. Most people are starting to agree with this. SeaWorld will hopefully start listening to the protesters soon.
In theater.
Helen had nothing to do one Saturday night. "Let's go to a drive-in theater," said Donna. Helen had no idea what that was. Donna told her she would love it. Helen agreed to go. Drive-in theaters play movies outdoors. People park their cars in front of a giant screen. They each get a pair of speakers. Everyone watches the movie from their cars. Helen had seen many of them in old movies. "This is where people used to go on dates," she said. She had no idea they still existed. The girls watched a horror movie. It was scarier than watching it in a room with a bunch of people. "They should bring these back," said Donna.
All you can eat.
Robert's family got together every Sunday. They always had lunch together. Every week they went to the same restaurant. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Robert's family loved eating. This was the perfect restaurant for them. Robert's mom always ate the most. She would serve herself at least 4 plates for one meal. His dad was a picky eater. The buffet gave him plenty of options. Aunt Nelsie loved the buffet the most. She always brought a bag with her. She would make sure no one was looking at her. Then she would drop food into the bag. Her bag was 3 times bigger than before by the time she left.
Taking the bus.
Ms. Jackson's car broke down. She took it to the car shop. It had to stay there for 1 week. Ms. Jackson needed a car. She had to get to work somehow. "You can take the bus," said her friend. Ms. Jackson had never taken the bus. She was scared of it. She thought she would get lost. "I've even heard of people getting robbed on buses," she said. "You'll be fine," said her friend. Ms. Jackson got on the bus. it was not very scary. She was actually very relaxed. She ended up falling asleep. She missed her stop and was late for work.
The cold.
Daniel caught a cold. He had fever and chills. His nose was running all day. He couldn't even stop sneezing. Daniel visited the doctor. He was told to rest and relax. "Stay in bed for 3 days," said the doctor. Daniel did not listen. His friends wanted to go swimming. "Come with us," they told him. "You'll be fine." Daniel and his friends stayed in the pool until late at night. The next morning, Daniel felt terrible. His voice was completely gone. He was shaking all morning. He stayed this way for 5 days. He called his doctor for help. "You didn't listen to me, did you?" his doctor asked.
New shoes.
Mary Green wanted a new pair of shoes. She wanted some blue heels. They cost $150. Mary asked her dad for money. "Are you crazy?" said Mr. Green. "You don't even wear heels." Mary couldn't stop thinking about the heels. She kept bothering Mr. Green about them. Mr. Green felt bad. He wished he could afford the shoes. It would make Mary happy. Mr. Green saved money for Mary's birthday. He gave her the shoes. Mary wore them all night. They left her giant blisters. Mary hated them. She never wanted to wear them again. Mary told Mr. Green that she lost them.
Losing weight.
Michael Phillips is overweight. He wants to lose a lot of weight because he is not happy with how he looks. He is also very unhealthy. His last doctor's appointment was scary. He was told he was at risk of heart disease. Mr. Phillips knows that his diet needs to improve. He eats a lot of burgers and chips. He hardly picks up any fruits or vegetables. "Eating healthy is so boring," complains Mr. Phillips. The doctor gave him more advice. "You need to try exercising more," Mr. Phillips was told. He hardly ever even walks. He bought a treadmill. Mr. Phillips was very determined to succeed.
Learning to ride.
It was a big day for Ms. Wilson. She had just gotten her paycheck. She was on her way to buy her first bicycle. Ms. Wilson grew up in a poor family. They could never afford to buy her a bicycle. Ms. Wilson was now 30 years old. She had a good job and 2 children of her own. She wanted to teach them how to ride a bike, but first she had to learn herself. She chose a big blue bike from the bicycle store. Now it was time to practice. Her first day on the bike was terrible. "This is so much harder than it looks," she yelled. After many, many falls, Ms. Wilson got it down. She felt very proud. "I can't wait to teach my kids now," she said.
The pet chicken.
Andrew Williams got a new pet. It was a baby chick. His parents brought it home one day. At first, Andrew did not like the chick. He wanted a different pet. "All of my friends have dogs or cats," he complained. The chick followed Andrew everywhere. She was very cute. After 2 months, Andrew grew very close to her. He named her Rex. Andrew got home from school one day. He started looking for Rex. He couldn't find her anywhere. Rex ran away from home, said Andrew's mom. Andrew was confused. Then he looked at the oven. His mom was cooking a chicken for dinner. Andrew cried.
The last cigarette.
Mr. White had a bad habit. He was a chain smoker. Mr. White knew his addiction was unhealthy. He couldn't even take walks anymore. He spent all day coughing. Mr. White spent 1 year trying to quit smoking. He would always buy a pack and promise himself it would be the last cigarette. Mr. White went to his doctor for a checkup. His doctor asked him to take an X-ray. They found a tumor on his left lung. He had cancer from all the smoking. Mr. White went home scared. He threw out his cigarettes, but he kept one. This would finally be his last cigarette.
We've been robbed.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith had a fun night out. They had been dancing all night. They did not get home until 3 a.m. They found their front window broken. They ran inside. Everything was thrown on the floor. Their televisions were missing. Their laptops were gone. Even their fancy plates were taken. Mrs. Smith started crying. "We've been robbed," she screamed. The police were called in. "It will probably be impossible to find the burglars," they said. Mr. Smith started cleaning the mess. He saw something lying by the windowsill. It was a wallet. The burglar had dropped it while jumping through the window.
Back to school.
Mr. Gonzalez was a janitor. He was unhappy with his career. He was a smart man. He knew he could do more with his life. Mr. Gonzalez wanted to go back to college. He had always dreamed of becoming a teacher. If he finished college, this could come true. Mr. Gonzalez was 40 years old. His children told him he was too old to go back to college. "You will look like a grandpa," they joked. "That's not true," said Mr. Gonzalez. "I will be the wisest student there." Mr. Gonzalez graduated from college 4 years later. His children were very proud of him.
Cat lovers.
Jenny White loved her cats. She owned 6 of them. Jenny spent all her days with the cats. Her friends worried about her. "You should go out more," they said. "I can't stand leaving my cats alone," replied Jenny. One day, Jenny met a man at work. He was funny and handsome. Jenny started going out with him a lot. She thought he was perfect. Jenny invited him to her house. She was very excited. "He's going to love my cats," she thought. The man walked into her house. He started sneezing. He couldn't breathe. He was allergic to cats. "I hate cats," he screamed.
The new waiter.
Mark Smith needed to get a job. There was one problem. Mark was a bit lazy. He wanted to do something easy. "I know," he said. "I can be a waiter." "I don't think that's the best job for you," said his mom. "Why not?" Mark replied. He thought the job looked very simple. All I have to do is clean tables, said Mark. Plus, I would get big tips. Mark got hired as a waiter in a small cafe. He soon realized his mom was right. Everyone who ate left a big mess on the table. Mark hated cleaning up. He was very slow at it, too. He kept dropping plates on the floor. To top it off, he wasn't very nice to customers. They left him small tips. Mark was fired after 3 days.
Pottery is for girls.
Sharon Carter wanted to take a pottery class. She didn't want to go alone. She invited her husband to go with her. I don't want to do that, said Mr. Carter. Pottery is for girls. This made Sharon very angry. She could not believe he said that. That's a sexist thing to say, yelled Sharon. She argued with him for hours. Mr. Carter was tired of fighting. He agreed to go just to shut Sharon up. Their first class went very well. Mr. Carter was really good at making pots. The instructors loved him. You are very talented, they all said. Mr. Carter went to pottery class every week after that. He loved it.
The sad hike.
Deborah and Paul Evans loved nature. They especially liked hiking. They hiked the mountain almost every evening. They always took their dog, Buddy. Buddy loved his owners. Hiking was one of his favorite things, too. One day, the news reported a cougar sighting. We advise hikers to beware the mountains tonight, said the reporter. Deborah and Paul thought about staying home that evening. I'm sure we'll be safe, said Paul. Cougars usually hide from humans. Deborah, Paul, and Buddy made it to the top of the mountain. Suddenly, they heard a roar. The cougar jumped out. It leapt at Deborah's face. Buddy jumped to save her. He scared the cougar away. Mr. and Mrs. Evans bought him 1,000 treats and toys the next day.
Missing pets.
Kenneth Baker woke up early Sunday morning. A terrible thing had happened. His cat was missing. He must have run away again, thought Kenneth. He went around asking his neighbors for information. That's odd, said his neighbor Sandra. My Chihuahua went missing last night, too. Kenneth kept walking around the neighborhood. He hoped to find the cat roaming the streets. Instead, Kenneth found something else. There were signs everywhere. They all said, missing cat or missing dog. I don't think these animals are running away, thought Kenneth. Then Kenneth saw something that broke his heart. There was a trail of blood on the floor. It led to the mountainside. A coyote must be taking all the small pets in the night.
Short shorts.
Lisa Adams was going out with friends. She was about to walk out of the house. Her mom stopped her. "What are you wearing?" shouted Mrs. Adams. "They're just shorts," replied Lisa. Mrs. Adams thought they looked more like underwear. "You're not going out wearing those," she said. Lisa said that wasn't fair. After half an hour of arguing, Mrs. Adams let Lisa leave. The next day, Mrs. Adams and Lisa went out to lunch. Mrs. Adams wore a tank top and very short shorts. "What are you wearing?" shouted Lisa. She was embarrassed to walk around with her mom showing her butt. "They're just shorts," replied Mrs. Adams.
A new tattoo.
Kevin Turner wanted to get a tattoo. He couldn't wait to get his first one. Tattoos are expensive. Kevin couldn't afford to go to a professional. "Don't worry," said his friend. "I know a guy who will do it for free." Kevin wasn't sure that was safe. He agreed to it anyways. Kevin asked the tattooist to draw a rose on his arm. The tattoo hurt a lot. Kevin couldn't take the pain. He shut his eyes tightly. He did not open them until the tattoo was finished. "What is that?" yelled Kevin. "It's a rose," said the tattooist. It looked more like a rock to Kevin. He never got a free tattoo again.
The Unlucky Millionaire.
Helen Young was an unlucky woman. So many bad things happened to her. She was always getting into accidents. None of them were her fault. 1 year ago, there was a small earthquake. It caused a telephone pole to crack. The pole landed on top of Helen's car. Another time, there was a small storm. Helen loves the rain. She walked outside to enjoy it. She was struck by lightning within 1 minute. Everyone laughed at Helen's bad luck. One day, that all changed. Helen tripped on the sidewalk. She found a lottery ticket laying on the ground. It had the winning numbers. Helen was now an unlucky millionaire.
Time capsule.
George Hernandez had 2 best friends. They had been friends since elementary school. Now they were all grown up. George was moving away to a university. Stephen was starting a family in another city. Charles got a job in another state. They had to say goodbye. George didn't want them to ever forget each other. "Let's make a time capsule," he said. They all went home. They looked for things that held memories of their being together. They found old toys, pictures, and CDs. They put them in a box. Then they buried the box in a park. The boys promised to get together in 10 years. They would dig up the box and feel like children again.
The baby blanket.
Betty Scott got big news. Her only son was going to have a baby. "I'm finally going to be a grandma," she thought. Betty was very excited. She couldn't wait for the baby to arrive. "I need to get the baby something special," Betty said. She decided to make a blanket. She would knit it herself. Betty was an elderly woman. Her hands weren't as strong as they used to be. They shook a lot and hurt often. Knitting was much harder than she remembered it. Still, Betty kept working on the blanket. "Anything for that baby," she thought. Betty struggled with the blanket for many months. She finished it right before the baby was born. It was the best present the baby ever got.
Speeding ticket.
Brian Nelson was late for work. He had been stuck in traffic for half an hour. The cars were finally starting to move. Brian had to make it to work in 10 minutes. If he was late, he would be in big trouble with his boss. "There's no way I'll make it in time," said Brian. Suddenly, a car raced past him. 3 seconds later, another car raced past him. They were going around 80 miles per hour. Brian knew that speeding was the only way he would make it to work on time. He looked around him. There were no cops in sight. He decided to push the speed up to 70. 2 seconds later, He heard sirens behind him.
Fishy Lake.
The Wright family loves fishing. They head to a nearby lake every weekend. They used to catch a lot of fish. Now they are lucky to end up with 2 fish altogether. There are differences at the lake. The water used to be crystal blue. Recently, it started looking a lot greener. It even smells a bit nasty. Mr. Wright is getting worried about it. There is a factory about a mile away from the lake. Mrs. Wright suspects that they are responsible for the changes. They're probably dumping their waste in the water, she says. That's probably killing all the fish. They probably won't eat the fish they catch there anymore.
Women can't fix cars.
Sarah's car wasn't turning on. She checked the engine. She saw the problem. One of her pipes was loose. She would have to buy a new piece to fix it. Sarah headed to the local auto shop. After she bought the pipe, an employee offered to help her put it in her car. "No thanks," said Sarah. "I can do it myself." The employee laughed when she said this. "What's so funny?" asked Sarah. "Girls don't know how to fix cars," said the man employee. Sarah was furious. She almost smacked him with the pipe. Instead, she talked to his manager. Then, on her way out the door, she knocked a shelf over. "I hope men know how to clean," she said.
A sport for short people.
David was a short man. He had always been the smallest boy in class. As an adult, he barely even passed 5 feet. His height made David's self-esteem very low. He wanted to change that. David had always liked sports. Sadly, short people have a hard time fitting in on most sport teams. "Have you thought about becoming a horse jockey?" asked a friend. David decided to give it a try. The next day, David visited the local racetrack. David didn't even get a chance to introduce himself. 3 people came up to ask if he was interested in joining their racing team. His height was finally a huge advantage. David fit right in.
Ghosts are not real.
Thomas looked like a tough guy. "Nothing can scare me," he always said. "Not even a ghost?" asked his friend. "Of course not," said Thomas. "Ghosts aren't even real." The next day, Thomas and his friends were bored. They went to go explore the neighborhood. They ran into an old abandoned house. They dared Thomas to go inside. He had to stay there for 5 minutes. Thomas was very brave at first. He couldn't see anything in the dark. Suddenly, he started hearing things. It sounded like a woman screaming. Thomas ran out of the house, crying.
Las Vegas.
Michael lived in Minnesota. He was visiting the West Coast. His friends were going to show him around. "I just want to see Las Vegas," said Michael. "Are you sure?" asked his friends. Michael insisted. He had always wanted to go to Las Vegas. Michael had seen a lot of movies about Vegas. Everything looked very bright and fancy. He couldn't wait to see it. When they arrived, Michael was confused. The streets all looked dirty and old. In the movies, everyone looked happy. In reality, half the people were drunk. The other half were angry from losing money in casinos. This isn't what I pictured, said Michael.
Little sisters.
Linda has a younger sister. Her name is Ruth. Linda is usually annoyed by Ruth. She tries to get away from her. Ruth follows her like a lost puppy. Linda is used to that by now. Ruth always looks up to Linda. She tries to do everything that Linda does. One day, Linda was getting ready to go out with friends. Linda didn't notice that Ruth was watching her when she was putting on her makeup. When Linda got home, Ruth was waiting for her in her room. Her face was covered with permanent markers. "What did you do?" shouted Linda. "I painted my face like you," answered Ruth.
Protective dad.
Elizabeth Williams was a beautiful girl. She grew up with her dad. Her dad was overprotective. He knew a lot of guys were interested in Elizabeth. Mr. Williams did his best to scare them all away. Boys would try to get Elizabeth's attention. Some would throw rocks at her window. They thought Mr. Williams wouldn't catch them. Mr. Williams bought 2 guard dogs. He trained them to attack boys who tried this. Some boys would try to walk Elizabeth home. Mr. Williams made sure this didn't happen. He parked right in front of her school every day. He brought his dogs with him each time. Elizabeth was single for a very long time.
Airplanes are safer than cars.
Donald Campbell needed to go to New York. He lived in Los Angeles. Driving there would take 3 days. His only other option was to take an airplane. That would take around 6 hours. Donald was afraid of airplanes. He had never been on one. "That's a dumb fear," said his friend. "Cars are more dangerous than airplanes." Donald was sure this was a lie. He didn't trust something so big in the air. Donald ignored his friend. He was going to drive for 3 days. Halfway through the trip, Donald got very sleepy. He was on the highway. He crashed into a giant trailer.
Surprise in the ocean.
Kimberly and Jason were surfing. They did this every weekend. They were far into the ocean. Suddenly, something touched Jason's foot. Jason froze. "Is something wrong?" asked Kimberly. "Don't move," Jason replied. "I think there's a shark under us." Kimberly panicked. She put goggles on. Then she looked under the water. When she came back up, she had a big smile on her face. She was laughing very loud. "This isn't funny," said Jason. Suddenly, a baby seal jumped onto Jason's surfboard. Jason screamed and jumped into the water. He hid there for almost a minute. "That's the shark," said Kimberly. Jason was very embarrassed.
The big fight.
Mr. and Mrs. King had a teenage daughter named Michelle. They were always arguing with her. Michelle was a good daughter. However, her parents were very strict. One evening, Michelle wanted to go out. Her parents weren't letting her go. "Your room isn't clean enough," shouted Mrs. King. Michelle decided to sneak out. Her parents did not know where she was going. The next morning, Mrs. King went to Michelle's room. She wanted to apologize for being so hard on her. Michelle was nowhere to be found. Since they did not get to ask where she was going, they did not know where to look. They never saw Michelle again.